It was a very unique pizza that no one in the world had had before, at least outside of this area of Detroit. It was brought to the world stage, I think in 2014, by a gentleman named Sean Randazzo, though it had been over 40 years they had been making it there. So what makes a Detroit pizza a Detroit pizza? It starts with the pan. In Detroit, there are many Sicilian immigrants that had moved in there, and they had no way to make their pizza in their own pans. While working in the automobile factories, they got pans very similar to this. They would hold the nuts and bolts for the motors. So because of these pans is all they had to cook with, they also had a situation where they didn't have this right kind of mozzarella cheese that we have today. They had a special kind of cheese that only they get there. It's called just a Volt cheese they have. It's called Wisconsin brick cheese. So because this cheese was so wet, they had to cook it on underneath the sauce in the pizza. So what that did also is it made a fried edge around the edge of the pizza. It made a queso frico is what it's called, cheese crown. So that way they would put the sauce on afterwards over the cheese in stripes. For the cheese, they would call it the racing stripes, the Detroit red top. We will get to making this now, or actually not quite now. What we're going to do now is explain to you about the dough that they use there. So traditionally, they do a 70% hydration dough. And today we made actually last night we made a 70% hydration dough. Now I do a twist on Detroit that's different from others because I use sourdough. So always, as a pizza chef, as a business owner, you have to be adaptable. So in this adaptability, usually for my doughs, I take 4 days for my dough to make this kind of pizza. But with only several days here to do it, we had to change things up in how we made and how we mixed our dough. So the first thing we did was changing the way I usually do my mix. Usually I do an auto-lease with my dough, where I just add the flour and the water, I mix it till it balls, I let it sit for an hour. But because I didn't have 72 hours to do this, I had 14 hours to do this, I had to change my method. So by doing so, what I did is I added my pre-ferment to the water before the flour, and I mixed it with my small amount of yeast and sugar. That way to feed the sourdough, to get the enzymes more active before I added the flour to it. And also I used a high W, a high protein flour. I used the Teglia Romana from Chico Stagiano, which is a fantastic flour. I'm really excited to try it out here with you guys today because I don't get that in America. So I get to experiment with you guys today with it. Also, we use room temperature water. Usually there's 2 different factors when you're dealing with sourdough. That's time and temperature. So we change the water temperature higher than we usually have it to help that fermentation process go along. When you're working with sourdough, it's important to realize that it is not an ingredient. It is your dough. And how are you feeding it into the dough you want? Once you think about your dough differently that way, and you learn your percentages, you can really make big jumps and leaps and bounds in the quality of the doughs you make. Then what we did after making the dough and letting it rest, so actually we didn't get a time to rest, right? Because we had to adapt. We immediately pushed it out in these pans, and we did 20 ounces, which let's see how many grams that is.
567.
567, yes.
567.
So traditionally with Detroit style pizza, they would let it rise and add the toppings and bake it together. But because I do sourdough actually tastes better the day after you bake it. Bakers know this when they make their breads. It's never good as soon as you cut it. You have to wait 24 hours. So we are in a unique position with this style of pizza that we can wait a day to cook it. And also it works for you as a business owner to be able to stockpile many of them. And so you can see here that we did our parbake. So we're looking for a nice golden brown to hold that weight. So when we push this pizza out, it was paper thin.
Yeah.
And then it rose overnight and we partially baked it to have it ready to be able to hold all the weight of the toppings we're going to put on it. It is important when you bake this the second time that we're going to add olive oil to the bottom. What happens is the fats we left in there will just burn on their own. But once we add oil, we'll actually fry the bottom of the pizza, making for a crispier pizza, making for a better caramelization and bake as well. And Anatoly was asking about the size of Detroit, and that's really what makes Detroit so special. It's very important they're narrow. That way every piece of pizza gets a piece of that cheese crown on the end of it, and that's a beautiful thing about it. And also the funny thing, in Detroit, you watch the children will fight over the quarter pieces because there's the ones that get the most cheese. I'm American and I love barbecue, so I love low and slow. I love 520 degrees, so it's about, I think it's about 300 degrees Celsius is right around there. Yeah, 300 Celsius. Well, it really depends on which bake. The first bake, we're gonna do it anywhere from 6 to 10 minutes, depending on the temperature of our room, the ambient temperature. And then the second bake will take up to 10 minutes. So by freezing your dough, you're introducing more moisture inside of it. When you bake it that second time, it makes it even crispier. That's why at my restaurant, I don't do 70%, I do 80% hydration. The more water you have, the crispier a pizza is. By adding water, you add volume. Then you dehydrate all that water out of it, you still have the volume for making for a very, very crispy crust. Let's make some pizza. Yeah, let's go. Let's do it. All right. So we're going to start with those parbakes over there first. So once again, adaptability is really, really important in what we do as restaurateurs. So that being said, usually I would have hot sauce that I would pour afterwards, but because we don't have the hot sauce, we're going to go and put the sauce on with the pizza as we bake it. And then also, we don't have this Wisconsin brick cheese here. So to adapt, I'm using 2 different kinds of mozzarella and also a cheddar mix. So a dry, low moisture mozzarella works very well to get this crown that we're looking for. So this is 12 ounces, about 340 grams. First thing we're gonna do, olive oil. Because you can see how caramelized this already is. If we were to put this in with that oil that's been in there now, this is just gonna burn. So we need to fry this with the olive oil. So that's what we're gonna do. Next, we put our 340 grams of cheese. So you'll notice that I'm pushing the cheese to the edge. I want this crown. I want it to be made and I want it to be visible. So now is where I would bake this in the oven. But because we don't have hot sauce, we need to heat the sauce. We're gonna go and put the sauce on now. So this is one of the traditional ways to cook it. Also, like I said before, the Detroit red top. In Detroit, where comes from, Detroit red top is the name of the road they would race their cars on. So we're gonna make 2 lanes to race our cars on.
But why they are doing it like this?
Because that's the Detroit red top, because that's how they do it. Here's our first. Next. So, I've always loved pepperoni pizza since we opened our first pizzeria. I am not alone. The most popular pizza at any of my pizzerias and any pizzeria in the United States is our pepperoni style pizza. So in this one, we're going to do a cup of char pepperoni.
Oil?
Oh,
Oil.
so it's important to, if you guys, you can smell this, smell the caramelization. Part of the reason why I use the 80% hydration for my pizzas is because I do more than one style with that dough. So I do Teglia Romana, Sicilian, I do Detroit, and then I do a artisanal, round, traditional. So with this beautiful high hydration dough, I'm more versatile in what I can do with one dough for several styles. You can see the cheese is melting. It's very important with this style of pizza, with this cheese, with these cheese crowns, you have to brown the cheese on top. This is a lot of cheese we're putting on the pizza. If you don't solidify this, you don't bake all the moisture off, it's gonna flop. It's gonna look like it has wings. And that's not, we're not looking for wings, we're looking for crown. So to do that, we have to make sure it's baked all the way through. I serve this by the slice at my pizzeria also. When I do by the slice, I always do bigger slices. So instead of cutting this into 8, I'll actually cut this into 6 slices. So for €5, €4.50, they get a giant sized pizza. Well, especially like I talked about before, one person in the family wants a Detroit style, one person wants a New York style, one person wants a Sicilian. COVID affected all of us and affected the money we had to spend. Even if you're spending €30 on a pizza, you're spending €30 to feed your whole family for 2 to 3 days. So that's what's the beautiful thing of pizza is that you can still feed your family for 30 euros as opposed to one plate of pasta for 20 euros. So what we're really looking for here is that caramelization. See the nice browning of the dough there? You see we need a little bit more there. So I'm going to put this back in the oven. This, you can see more of the caramelization around the edges. It's very important when we pull these out, we don't want to destroy it. You'll see a lot of places, they'll slide their spatulas across it. You're cutting off your crown, you don't want to do that. You want to make sure you put it in one spot and you slide it out. So you can see a little bit there. Need to bake a little bit more. Plus, we're dealing with cheeses that I'm not used to here. We didn't really have a low moisture. Also, to help with that, you can see how it's falling a little bit. I can let this sit in here a little bit longer. Let that cheese set. I don't need to be pushy. I don't need to be quick with this. So while we let this cheese set and we let this cool, we're going to go ahead and do pepperoni on this one. But we're going to do this a little bit differently. Usually now in the United States, pepperoni has evolved into something called cup and char pepperoni. Cup and char pepperoni is a thick casing around, natural casing, and is cut thick, so it actually cups together, looking almost like this spoon cupping up. Unfortunately, we don't have that. We do have some great local pepperoni. I think it was 20 years ago we would get cup and char pepperoni on accident. They cut it too thick. I'd say, I don't want this, send this back, this is horrible. Now this is what everyone wants to eat in my restaurants. It really depends on your view of how much you want. I've seen pizzerias that will cover the whole thing, and they'll bake a second pan of pepperoni just to put an extra pound of pepperoni. It's to your own taste, for sure. You notice how one side, I drop. And that we have the perfect crown on. And really what you're looking for in this too is that caramelization around the outside.
Bravo.
So we'll let those cool just for a little bit. This one we'll be able to cut here in a second. We want to keep an eye on that. And we also have some pans. I wish I had some more that could actually show you guys how to push this out. When you do your dough, when you push your dough out, it's very important that the dough is even in the pans. If you have too much on one side or not the other, it won't rise evenly, especially when you're dealing with such a small amount of dough that will rise very, very far. So it's important, and that's why I like the bigger pans also than the small ones, because it's easy to get my hands in there and press it out evenly. The moisture would trap. That's why I parbake also. When you put too many toppings on a pizza, you put too much moisture on a pizza, you get something called a gum line. A gum line is a chewy spot in the middle that you just can't get past. I recommend using a low moisture mozzarella. That's what gets the crowns. So you can see, because I oiled it, it did not burn, it fried. So now all you need is a pizza cutter. Coming from a small town in Washington, doing sourdough my whole life, I always loved what I did, but I didn't realize how good it was. When I started competing across the world, winning best sandwich, best calzone, best bagel in the world, it made me realize it's not just me, but it's the pre-fermentation, it's the flavors of these doughs. The only animal in the world that's designed to digest doughs is a cow. It has 3 stomachs and it belches. I don't care how many times I try belching, I can't make a direct dough taste as good as an indirect dough. It's how our body works, how we digest things. I always think of putting pepperoni like playing cards.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm dealing blackjack right now. Millions of pizzas I've made. Always pepperoni is my favorite. We're going to cover the whole top because we saw when we spaced them evenly, it really shrunk a lot. Once again, everything's about adaptability. It's about using what you have and how to make it well. Like I say, it's always really important to let it air dry, to let it dry out. When you're baking in a pan, there's a lot of moisture inside of it. You need to let it breathe. You need to let that water evaporate from the bottom of it.
O tavă să dăm și la băieții de la tehnică.
Cin cin.
Chin chin. Wow. I really appreciate his help here. He's been fantastic. Same with Anatoly, Chef Rado also. It's been really amazing time. This guy right here, my translator, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it.